This is Sound Reason, where today's culture and timeless truths come together. It's reason, relevant content apologetics, worldview, and answers to the questions that you need to know. Now, the man who preached in 50 states in 50 days. Please welcome your host for Sound Reason, author and educator, Dr. Alex Mcfarland.
Hi, this is Alex Mcfarland. Welcome back to Sound Reason. I'm so glad you're with us today because we've got a show today in which we're going to cover what I think is a pretty important question. I want to consider the question, is it unscientific to believe in God? I speak at a lot of university campuses. I interact with a lot of young people, a lot of college students, and every now and then I'll hear somebody say, well, it's no longer scientific to believe that there's a creator or a God. Or maybe the question is asked this way, has science maybe somehow disproven the Bible? Has science disproven God? I wrote a book recently entitled 10 Answers for Skeptics, and in the writing of this book, I interviewed several dozen of professed atheists, agnostics, the internet infidels, and some what I would call lapsed Christians that just have questions and have walked away from belief in God or a relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, there was a journalist years ago from the Detroit News, and he said this. He said, every age has its superstitions, and ours is the notion that science is the all-sufficient guide to truth. End of quote. Let me say this, but we're going to spend the entire show unpacking this in more depth. No. Science has not disproven God, and it is not, quote, unscientific to believe that there's a creator God. Now, it's important that the church be equipped to speak to issues like this because in recent years there have been what some have called the rise or the renaissance of atheism. Years ago, atheism was pretty much dead, but there have been a number of books by people like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and they've said in their titles kind of where they're coming from. Dawkins wrote a book called The God Delusion. And Christopher Hitchens, who we brought to my home state of North Carolina to be in a debate. And regrettably, he's facing cancer right now, and I hope you'll be praying for Christopher Hitchens. But he wrote a book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And many of these pro-atheism, anti-God books will plainly say that in this age of science, technology, it's no longer tenable to believe in God. Science has disproven God, negated the reality of the Bible, and I disagree. Let me give you a little bit of history, though, on how we got to this point, and let me give a couple of what I think are very necessary definitions. One of the definitions that we need to talk about is the word naturalism. Naturalism is the belief that the only way to make sense of reality is to understand it through the lens of this natural physical world. There's only the natural world, the naturalist would say. There's no supernatural world. Another word is empirical. Now, something that's empirical means you can physically touch it, you can examine it, you can cut it, measure it, weigh it, smell it. Empirical means what we can physically handle. Now, strict empiricism says that the only things that are true are things that we can physically handle. And these things together combine in what many have called methodological naturalism. Methodological means that's my approach to understanding reality. Naturalism, the physical world only. Methodological naturalism says, look, I don't care what facts come along, I don't care what evidence you show me, I'm going to adjudicate ahead of time that the only way to make sense of this world is to believe in natural, physical, empirical causes. There's no God outside that created us, there's no divine foot that we ever allow in the door. Methodological naturalism limits oneself to purely naturalistic explanations, and God must never be allowed into the equation. Well, I believe that fails on a number of levels, and we're going to talk about why that fails and how to respond to it. But I think that in the initial stages of this conversation, we've got to point out that in the classroom, throughout much of the media, and increasingly in the public discourse, the mindset is pervading our culture that science and scientism, science is the only test for truth, naturalism is the only way we look at the world, God must not be introduced into the conversation. This is where many people are, and we have to give a response. When we come back, we'll do that. So stay tuned.
If you value the news and commentary that you hear on Sound Reason, I have an offer I think you're going to love. World Magazine is the largest Christian news magazine in the country. Every other week, 26 times a year, World Magazine brings you news and analysis of important events that you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're frustrated by the often anti-Christian bias of most news outlets, give World Magazine a try. To make that easy, we want to send you the next 6 issues absolutely free. Simply go to getworldnow.com and use the promo code SOUNDREASON. We'll rush you the next 6 issues absolutely free. No rants, no raves, just solid, thoughtful reporting and lively writing from a distinctly Christian perspective. That's what World Magazine is all about. So to get your free sample issues, just go to getworldnow.com. That's getworldnow.com.
I'm Jamarius Robinson, played defensive back. I'm a senior at North Grumman University. When I was a little kid, I used to get into a lot of trouble, and so my mom put me in football just to keep me out of trouble. It just taught me how to have character at all times. Just been doing Palmetto Boys State for about 5 to 6 years now. It's been hand in hand with just North Greenville and just the character that the school has just taught me to have. I became a better man, a better leader, a better servant, a better Christian.
Welcome back to Sound Reason. We're talking about the question, is it unscientific to believe in God? And I want to give you several things to keep in mind when approaching this issue. Before the break, we were talking about some definitions, and let me give you one. And there's a term that you may not have heard, but I guarantee you've heard the assumption that goes behind it. And the term, and it's used in academic circles, is NOMA. N-O-M-A, and it stands for non-overlapping magisteria. And you might be thinking, what in the world is that? Well, it relates to several years ago. There was a scientist who was an evolutionist, and his name was Stephen Jay Gould. And he set forth the idea that faith and science are two different things. They have their own worlds they operate in, but they do not overlap. And it was one of the ways that really evolutionists tried to put God out of the classroom, belief in a creator out of the discussion, and evolutionists quickly latched on to the concept of NOMA, non-overlapping magisteria. And basically, to school boards and certain judges in court cases, evolutionists that were arguing on the side of pure naturalism, no such thing as God, naturalism, empiricism only, methodological naturalism, they would say, you see, there are these two magisteria, or these two realms of thought. There's faith, and that's okay, you little simpletons who believe in God, as long as you keep it at home or keep it in your Sunday school class. There's this realm, we acknowledge faith exists, but then there's true knowledge, which is science, and they dare not overlap. These two magisteria that might take up bandwidth in our brain, faith and science, two worlds, but we dare not let them intersect. And so the two magisteria must be kept forever separate. And this is what's called a false dichotomy. In other words, a false dilemma that's an unnecessary separation. A false dichotomy is pulling apart two things that don't necessarily have to be separated. Now, you have been presented with a false dichotomy before in your life, I guarantee. Let's say you're in a store and the salesman walks up to you and says, well, did you come in here today to buy a washer, or did you come in here to buy a dryer? Well, maybe neither. Maybe I'm just waiting on my wife to get finished shopping. How about this? Do you agree with my position on global warming, or do you want the human race to die? That's a false dichotomy. Maybe I don't agree with your position on global warming, but I don't want the human race to die either. I've got another alternative. Well, this idea of either God or science is a false dilemma that's absolutely unnecessary. Let me tell you, God was no problem for Blaise Pascal. God was no problem for Gregor Mendel, the founder of genetics. God was no problem for Louis Pasteur or Isaac Newton. And in fact, some of the best and the brightest scientific leaders of the past and scientists today in the present don't have a problem believing in God, and many, in fact, are born-again Christians. And so this is important to talk about, because at the academic levels, I've met many that are believers and aren't ashamed to admit it. But at the street level, where lay people live, and folks like me and you, and heaven help our poor students in the classroom, at the popular level, many assume, well, maybe science has somehow disproven God, and it's unscientific and irrational to believe that a creator exists. However, as I've said, I've met many PhDs. I was writing a book several years ago entitled Stand Strong in College, and I interviewed dozens of professors, many of whom are born-again Christians, from the various branches of science. And then I've met, in the course of writing my new book, Answers to Skeptics, I've interviewed professors that were believers, some that weren't. But I think it's important to get this point across, and hear me carefully. When someone says, science has disproven God, know this, friends, there is not this one big monolithic thing called science. There are the sciences, and each branch of science has its different ways of doing that particular pursuit. There's no one rule book for all of the sciences. I mean, there's chemistry, there's biology, there's astrophysics, there's quantum mechanics, there's geology. There are the sciences. And so when someone at the popular level says, well, maybe science has disproven God, listen, there is no one tablet somewhere called science, and science has negated God. Not at all. Know this, my friend. There has never been a scientific discovery that proved there wasn't a God. You can't disprove that there's a God. And so while it's conventional wisdom, it's kind of a popular buzz phrase, science has disproven the Bible, science has disproven God, science has disproven Christianity. Absolutely false. There are these sciences, and each one of the sciences has different ways that that particular pursuit is handled. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk more about this, and I'm going to give several things to keep in mind when considering what about science has affirmed the biblical worldview, and the recognition that science in no way has refuted or negated the Christian worldview. Now, there are some theories that are out there that stand against what Christianity asserts. But a scientific discovery that has disproven God, quote unquote, never happened, doesn't exist. More about this is available on my website, which is alexmcfarland.com. We've got many answers to many questions, but stay tuned, because when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion about God and science.
I am.
I am ready. I am ready.
I'm ready to see what the world has to offer.
I am.
I am ready to go. Go.
Teach.
To spread the gospel.
I am ready to explore.
I'm ready for a challenge.
I am.
I'm ready to make a difference. To be a difference maker.
I am.
I am ready.
I am ready.
I am ready.
Becoming a Difference Maker, North Greenville University.
I am Tawana Scott with North Greenville University's T. Walter Brazier Graduate School. We offer a master's degree in ministry, business, and education, as well as a Doctor of Ministry degree. We have a faculty of scholars who are also practitioners in their professional fields. Our quality and affordability make us the very best value in the region, whether you choose online or in the classroom. We are North Greenville University's graduate school, where Christ-centered graduate education is our mission.
Visit us online at alexmcfarland.com.
Hey, welcome back. We're so glad you're watching Sound Reason, and we're talking about science and God. And I want to give you several things to keep in mind. As I said, point one is this, that there is no such thing as science. There are the sciences, and each one has their different methods and ways that they operate, their different principles. And so each one is different. And many of these sciences don't remotely resemble the others in their methodologies. And so within any of the branches of science, there's never been a discovery that disproved God. Secondly, know this point, that naturalism doesn't guarantee rationality. And science does not have to be inherently naturalistic. Remember, I defined naturalism as the belief that all that exists is this natural world, and there are no causes outside the natural world that we could ever acknowledge or recognize. And only science, this physical, empirical, naturalistic way of doing science, is rational and reasonable. That's the presupposition. Let me say this. Naturalism doesn't guarantee rationality. And science doesn't have to be naturalistic. Friends, you've got to know this. This dichotomy of separation of faith and God and science must be absolutely, unflinchingly naturalistic, humanistic, physical, empirical. That not only is a false dichotomy, it's a recent development throughout the history of science. The great science founders, I would say trailblazers and pioneers, if you will, were believers in God, and many of them Christian. And so this idea of the non-overlapping magisteria is a very, very recent development, as I said, within the last 30 to 40 years. Thirdly, know this, that theism, and I want to define this, does not guarantee irrationality. Now, theism is the belief that there is a God. The word theos is a word for God. And many, like Richard Dawkins has written in his book, that belief in God is a type of mental disorder. Not at all. Theism does not guarantee irrationality, and faith doesn't mean that someone is unreasonable. I mean, think about some of the people in history, from Augustine to Thomas Aquinas to C.S. Lewis to George Washington Carver, and as I mentioned, Louis Pasteur and others. Maury, who invented oceanography, was a devout Christian, and on we could go. In fact, I would argue that recognition that there must be an ultimate first cause is really much more rational than assuming something came from nothing and something turned into something else by unguided accidental processes. Point four is this, that the presence of scientists does not guarantee objectivity. Now, objectivity is the unbiased, dispassionate approach to something. It's like they used to say on Dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. We've lived in a time with stem cell research and cloning in which there have been scientists that were exposed as having faked their data, and in different departments where grant money is at stake and tenure hangs on the line, there have been people that falsified data and maybe promoted evolutionary type answers only rather than allowing for belief in God to defend some preconceived agenda or presupposition. Here's my point. the presence of scientists in no way guarantees objectivity. In fact, on more than one occasion, scientists have been caught fudging their data. In fact, Einstein himself did this in the early part of the 20th century and fudged the data, put in what he called a fudge factor, because he didn't like the conclusion he was getting that the universe had a beginning. So scientists, even the best, can be non-objective, subjective, and biased. Point 5 is this, that scientists don't enjoy the unified front many assume. Many people assume that science has spoken with this unified voice, an absolute seamless whole, evolution, naturalism, no such thing as God. Let me just give you some quotes. Michael Denton, an MD and a molecular biologist, said the following. Michael Denton said this, ultimately, the Darwinian theory of evolution is no more or no less the great cosmogenic myth of the 20th century. In other words, a myth about how things began. The overriding supremacy of this myth, said Denton, has created the widespread illusion that the theory of evolution was all but proved 100 years ago, and that all subsequent biological research, paleontological, zoological, and in the new branches of genetics and molecular biology, has provided ever-increasing evidence for the Darwinian ideas. Nothing could be further from the truth, says Michael Denton. And many more scientists that I can quote and will quote when we come back. But let me say this, friend. Science has not presented the unified front that many would assume. One Swedish scientist said this, I believe one day that the Darwinian gradualist myth will be ranked as the greatest deceit in the history of science. When this happens, many people will pose the question, how did this ever happen? Stay tuned. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about this very important topic on Sound Reason. Don't miss it. We're back after this.
Sound Reason with Alex Mcfarland. We'll be back after this break.
If you value the news and commentary that you hear on Sound Reason, I have an offer I think you're going to love. World Magazine is the largest Christian news magazine in the country. Every other week, 26 times a year, World Magazine brings you news and analysis of important events that you simply can't get anywhere else. So if you're frustrated by the often anti-Christian bias of most news outlets, give World Magazine a try. To make that easy, we want to send you the next 6 issues absolutely free. Simply go to getworldnow.com and use the promo code SOUNDREASON. We'll rush you the next 6 issues absolutely free. No rants, no raves, just solid, thoughtful reporting and lively writing from a distinctly Christian perspective. That's what World Magazine is all about. So to get your free sample issues, just go to getworldnow.com. That's getworldnow.com.
Visit us online at alexmcfarland.com.
Welcome back. We're talking about the fact that science doesn't always enjoy the unified front that a lot of people assume. And I want to continue to give you a couple of more quotes. I just find these interesting. Isaac Manley, an MD of the Harvard Medical School, said this, evolution is a fairy tale myth. Society has suffered as a result of this adult fantasy. Evolutionists claim their theory is scientific, but where is the evidence? Dr. Ken Sue, he was president of the International Association of Sedimentologists. Dr. Sue said this, quote, we have had enough of the Darwinian fallacy. It's about time we cry out, the emperor has no clothes. That was in an article entitled Darwin's 3 Mistakes. A Nobel Prize winning physicist, Arno Penzias, said this, quote, creation is supported by all the data so far. A famous Canadian geologist, William Dawson, said this, the record of the rocks is decidedly against evolution. One last quote, Dr. Louis Bonjour, director of a zoological museum in France, the National Scientific Center for Research in France, said this, quote, evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. Another point that I think we need to bring out is that innovation has always faced resistance. For 150 years, Darwinian evolution, naturalism, godless, undirected evolution of life has had a stranglehold on the academic world, and the idea that that's false and letting go and admitting there is an ultimate first cause. We live in a theistic universe. There must be a God. Now, we haven't gotten to the Bible or Jesus. We're not saying that science has to say what kind of God, but just letting students know that there's a creator. This is a paradigm shift, and this faces resistance. New ideas always face resistance. So let me ask you this. Would you be willing to be revolutionary? Would you be willing to speak against the party line and to stand up and unashamedly say, you know, I believe in God. There's no evidence for evolution. We've never seen something come out of nothing. As G.K. Chesterton, the great thinker 100 years ago from Britain, brilliant man, he said, we've never seen something come from nothing, and we've never visually observed something turn into something else. It's a faith position. Let me give you a quote. I mentioned Stephen Jay Gould, who came up with the idea of non-overlapping magisteria and the false dichotomy that we explained earlier in the show. Here's something Gould said that's very telling. Follow me here. He said, gradualism, in other words, the belief that things just gradually, incrementally, sequentially evolved. Gould, a devout evolutionist, said, gradualism was never proved by the rocks, by Charles Lyell and Darwin, but was rather imposed as a bias upon nature. And it's had a profoundly negative impact by stifling hypotheses and by closing the minds of a profession toward reasonable empirical alternatives to the dogma of gradualism. Lyell, in other words, Darwin's colleague, Lyell won with rhetoric what he could not carry with data. End of quote. Now, friends, that is huge. That is huge. From the get-go, 150 years ago, evolution has traveled farther on dogma and rhetoric and, frankly, academic intimidation and propaganda than any evidence. You can't point to a scientific proof that God doesn't exist. Can't point to a scientific proof that God didn't create. And with all of the discoveries about the universe's beginning, the universe's expansion, the complex encrypted data that's in our DNA, and we know that information can't arise except from an intelligent source. Science, pure science, the unbiased pursuit of truth, is on the side of creation and is on the side of belief. And so what a challenge, especially for young people, to be revolutionary. Psalm 19 says the heavens and earth bear the glory of God, point to the reality of the Creator. So we who know the Creator, let's point to His reality as well.